Okay. I see the notice that we're being live streamed. Okay. Eric, I really like your background image.
Well, that's where he works. You're at work now?
I am.
Yes.
Okay.
Although don't say that so loud because no one's supposed to know.
Oh, okay. Mom's
but yes, no, that I am at work. Although I am not actually in the room with the machine behind me.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Although it kind of looks like it is, but yeah, that's just one of our gigantic steam pumps that we have here. One of three.
Yes.
A couple of months ago, we were admitted into the big old building at Horn Pond in Woburn.
Oh, did you go to that? All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I know some of the machinery in there. Yeah.
Was that moving or was it just was that the cleaning day?
Well, it was a special tour given by the Woburn Historical Society. And, and we met the two young men who have been refurbishing and making the machinery work. They're so excited about it.
Yeah, Alex.
They'd been to your museum, and of course they had.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yes, there's a long backstory behind that. Did you see the machine operating?
I don't think they had it running. No, they didn't.
Okay, yeah.
Though they told us it had been running.
Yeah,
right.
Maybe at the time when we go in.
Yep. Yeah, no, I knew about that, and actually, we're pretty closely connected to those guys because they keep wanting to come and turn this thing on.
What do you think about that idea?
No.
Oh, okay.
Only because they're not museum people, really. So the idea of damaging the something that can't be repaired. Yeah, they're more excited about getting the thing going, which is great, but sometimes that's not possible in some places. So we're negotiating still.
Okay.
Yeah, well, one thing I learned from park rangers is paramount about everything is protecting the resource.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Right. Yeah, no, I can, if I wasn't the guy responsible, I'd probably be on the other side of it. But yeah, I'm very conservative about that. And particularly this machine behind us is one of a kind. So it's the last example of that engineer's work in the world. So I don't think we'd really want to risk hurting it in any way. Potentially the other ones. I mean, it is a piece of machinery after all.
Yeah. So this is great. People are starting to filter in.
They are. Come on into our living room.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Dallas Robinson.
I'm Matt Sheehan.
We belong to Forsyth's Rifles on the St. Lawrence River in Augsburg, New York.
Oh, fantastic.
We're members of the Fort La Presentation Association.
Excellent. And somehow you heard about us at the Mass History Alliance.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yes.
That's great. Well, we love that. We expect a pretty good audience today. So thank you for coming. And
you're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I think your questions are going to be, I can already tell it's going to be great.
Hi, Matt and Dallas. Is it possible for you to change your name to reflect who you are?
No, I'm on my girlfriend's computer at her house, so.
Okay, I can rename you. Is it Matt and Dallas?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I didn't know that was possible. Okay.
She's good at it.
She's rename us then to Christopher and Claire Hurley.
She can probably do that.
Oh, that'd be great.
You can too. Just go over the three dots in your own box, and then you'll see an option for renaming. Do you see it?
I'll go with the glasses again.
Hover over the three dots and hover with your cursor over your own box.
Chat show, pause recording, stop recording, polls, breakout rooms, reactions.
No renaming.
No. Hover with your cursor over your own box that your own faces are in.
Oh, okay.
And you see three
Okay.
dots in the right top corner.
There we go.
And then there it says rename.
There we are. That's better.
Oh, this is fantastic. I learn something new every day.
Well, thank you.
Well,
Wow.
That's like behind this.
and we're coming up to 12. Is this the point where we should mute ourselves for a while?
Yeah, probably good idea.
I'll tell you when it's time. You feel free to chat. I'm still taking attendance, so I have these two roles, and I want to wait another couple of minutes to make sure that we. So, let me.
I'm going to attempt to stay on mute as much as possible, just because I am at work, so there's doorbells and phones and things going off in the background.
Oh, okay.
And Sarah, looks like you might have some, is that some reenacting wardrobe behind you?
Yes, when we were doing the Carol, my boss was at a fundraiser last night where everyone was requested to dress up. And we actually had in our sort of dress up basket at one of the houses an old Felicity costume and some other things that she was trying on to see, because we have not pulled her into the reenacting world yet. But she is being increasingly asked to dress up for various internal events, because that's sort of how we roll around here.
Ah, I see Darlene joined.
Yes.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Darlene. Okay. And Sue Rockwell, hi. All right.
Hi, folks.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, all. Welcome to Conversations on the Commons. We're still letting people in, so feel free to chat with each other for a little while until the stream stops, and then I will start welcoming people.
Okay, thank you.
Well, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. James Madison, 4th President of the United States. I am excited to be here.
Good afternoon, President.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to
Hello.
Conversations on the Commons, a project of the Massachusetts History Alliance. My name is Plume Borisius. I am the president of the Mass History Alliance. I am also today your technical host and your Mass History Alliance host. So I've got many roles, so bear with me if I make mistakes. But first, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So Conversations on the Commons are just that, informal conversations. And you are invited to participate in the discussion, ask questions, and use the chat. This event is streamed live on YouTube, and those of you watching there are invited to comment and send questions, which we will monitor to the best of our ability. Let me just let a couple of people in. Okay. Upcoming conversations on the commons. In February, we are going to have one on working with high schoolers, history organizations working with high schoolers. On March 10th, No Battles Fought Here, a conversation about planning revolutionary commemoration in your town, even if your town did not see any battles or any war action. And in March 24th, we are going to talk about researching the history of enslavement in Massachusetts. Before we start, here is some housekeeping. Once we start the conversation, please keep your microphone muted until you are called on. This lowers the background noise and makes it easier for everybody to hear. Let me just let some more people in from the waiting room. This is meant to be an informal conversation. We invite you to turn on your video, and we also invite you to use the chat. We send the chat around afterwards. So start by introducing yourselves, put your name, email address, town or organization if you want to share those, and also comment, ask questions, share resources, or raise any tech issues during the conversations. I'm sorry, my script bops away every time I admit people. I have to find it back. Let us know if you have something to say by raising your hand. You can do that either mechanically or you can actually go like this and raise your hand. If you're on the phone, just ask to break it. Make sure that your name is correct in the participant list or in the box below the name below your face. You can do this by hovering over your name in the list and then clicking more. If you're on your phone, just click participants, then click your name. If we get Zoom bombed, we will try to get people out, but if that doesn't work, we will immediately close the conversation and send you a link for a new one to start immediately. So look at your email if that happens. This is why I'm taking attendance, by the way, just in case you're wondering why I'm doing that, that's why. After today's conversations, please leave us with a survey response. The link will be in the chat in a minute. I'm gonna put a whole bunch of links into the chat right now. And here they are. Okay. I'd like to thank MHA's top sponsors, Mass Humanities, the Bennett Rosenberg Family Fund, the State Historical Records Advisory Board, Mike Petoskey, and the Dorchester Historical Society. You can find all of our sponsors on the Commons website. The link will be in the chat. We also like to invite you to list your organizations in the Commons directory, that is the Mass History directory, and or sponsor the Commons. Everything costs money. If you can only spare $25, we'll gladly have it. My trying to do 5 things at the same time today tells you what happens when we don't have our coordinator. Our coordinator is moving on. The position has been listed. I'll actually put the link to it in the chat in a few minutes if you know someone who's interested. And so that's what we're asking for money for. So for the past few years, Eric Peterson, who will be our moderator, has served as the executive director of the Waterworks Museum. Committed to strengthening public awareness of the vital importance of history by helping to protect the sites, artifacts, and organizations that bring the past into the present, Eric currently serves as vice president and treasurer of the Mass History Alliance. He's also a co-founder of Industrial History of New England. He's going to be our moderator today. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you so much, Plume. I hope everybody can hear me. It's wonderful to see so many participants here. Very excited to to moderate this affair. We're going to make it a very casual conversation, but it's going to be fascinating, I have no doubt. So our topic today is called Historical Reenactors. I'm sure you already know all this. Hobby, avocation, profession, or lifestyle. So I thought about this program a while ago, and I really was cemented in my mind when I attended the reenactment on April 19th on the Lexington Green. Now, I'm from Lexington. Most of my life I've lived there. I've been to many reenactments, but it's been a while. And two of our guests here invited me to a special spot there, which if you've ever attended, you'll know you kind of need that because it's very popular. And I brought with me a friend from Italy who had never been to a reenactment, an American reenactment before. And as I pulled up in my car at the Stop and Shop and realized all the other cars around me had people in them at 4:30 in the morning, I realized that this is something that people really like to go to and really enjoy. And sure enough, when I was out there on the green, wondering in the cold, why the heck I agreed to do this. And I looked around and I felt that excitement. It was just amazing. You know, I'm also a sports fan, and it's different. There's something different about that history anticipation. And as the birds sort of started to wake up, and it was freezing cold, as you guys know, and thankfully it wasn't rainy or even more awful, which it mostly often is. To hear those drums and the fifes of the British coming from a distance and the bells ringing, it really was something that it just raises the hair on the back of your neck. I mean, there's nothing more that I think, and I do this for a living. You can see behind me, this is the museum I work at now. Nothing more stirring and bringing you right into the world of history than being there and feeling that sensation, that fear. I mean, I was, you know, it was really, my heart was in my throat. I mean, I wanted to run. It was just amazing. And then the rest of the action that ensued, of course, is just very exciting and thrilling. And before you know it, it's all over and it's time for breakfast. So I wanted to start with that sense there because it was something that I realized as a history practitioner, it really is cutting edge stuff. If it's done right, you can bring people into a world that they may have never experienced. So with that, I would like to introduce our three panel members today. First up is Claire Hurley. She is there. You may see her over there. She has a degree in biology from Framingham State and also from the Heller School for Social Policy and Management at Brandeis. She's been working at the Heller School editing manuscripts related to health economics for nearly 25 years. She began in the hobby of 18th century reenacting in 2005 for the Woburn Historical Society and was joined by her husband, Chris, who's there with her, in that hobby a couple of years later. She participates in numerous events with the Lexington Minutemen. She is also part of the Lexington Historical Society Colonial Singers and Linen and Lace, a three-person musical group performing colonial era music. And while Claire mainly participates in 18th century reenactments, she has also portrayed a pilgrim, a Civil War nurse, and an Irish maid complete with the brogue, circa 1910. And Claire is also a board member of the Woburn Historical Society, which is another member of our Mass History Alliance. So Claire's husband, Chris, has a degree in mass communications from UMass at Amherst and a master's in software engineering from Brandeis. Funny how they're overlapped, these people. And works for a medical software company. He's been a historical reenactor since 2007 and usually in portrayals related to the American Revolution era, although he's often seen as a nameless militiaman in countless battles. Chris has portrayed distinct individuals caught up in the tides of history. In the Battle of Lexington reenactment, Chris portrays Ashel, am I saying it right? Ashel Porter, a released prisoner of the British regulars who may be the first fatality of the revolution. And Chris is a board member of the Lexington Minuteman. And finally, we have Sarah, Sarah McDonough, who is there. Hi, Sarah. She has a master's in education from Tufts, specializing in 18th century social history and material culture, and a background in theater. And currently, she is the public programs manager at the Lexington Historical Society. Sarah began her work in Lexington as a costume museum educator and tour guide in 2009, and joined the wonderful world of reenacting in 2013. Over time, Sarah's historical hobbies have grown from simple sewing to hearth cooking and spinning thread on a spinning wheel. She is a member of His Majesty's 10th Regiment of Foot, a British Army reenactment group, and is a volunteer at Minuteman National Park and the Newport Historical Society, where she has portrayed a wide range of colonial women from tavern keepers to codfish aristocracy. So we're very lucky to have these three folks join us today. They were kind to set aside time to tell us about what they do. And I'm sure many of you in the audience are interested, and maybe you guys do the same thing, but we'll get to that. So I guess the first question would go to any of you three, and so we'll be relaxed about that. But before we do that, I want to throw out a poll, and I think you can answer that in the chat, I believe. And that would be, what kind of organization are you from? Oh, there it is. Okay. That's our main poll question right there. And if you also want to add in the chat, have you hosted reenactors at your organization? Did you find it worthwhile? Did you have members who are reenactors, or do you have members? And if you were to have reenactors at an event you sponsored, what would be your goal? How would you measure success? How would you measure the worthwhile of all of this? So those are just some ideas to think about, which would just be helpful for everybody really to share in. All right, so let's get into some questionings here. Let's see, what do I got? Well, I wanted to ask each of our three panelists this first question is, how did you start doing this? Did it just evolve, or was there a defining moment that made you realize this is something you want to do?
Claire, why don't you start?
Well, back in the early 2000s, the Woburn Historical Commission was putting on an event in North Woburn, right near the Route 128, Route 38 intersection, to highlight an historic area. In colonial days, that area was called New Bridge Village. And they wanted, costumed guides to stand in front of a building, and as the public walks to your building, you talk about it. And I thought, well, when they asked me about it, I said, well, I was at one time a volunteer with Boston by Foot. I'm used to standing in front of a building, talking about the history and the architectural features. Sure, I'll do that. So the day went very well, but little did I know that there would be more opportunities. And these folks kept coming back, especially Darlene Wigton, who I believe is listening right now, saying, we're doing this other event, we'll lend you some clothing. And little by little, they began to draw me into event after event until I got to the point that I thought, well, I think I need my own clothing. I'm doing this all the time. I'm having so much fun.
Yeah, and I got dragged into it. At first, I was just a nameless person in the back of a small group of militia people who were marching off towards Lexington. But other reenactors there invited us to take part in the Battle of Bunker Hill Day parade. And then by the end of the summer, we were going to a reenactment at Fort No. 4 in New Hampshire, and I was starting to buy clothing and a musket. Sarah, what about you?
I've always found that there's an interesting intersection, which I know is very true in all of the folks that are listening today, between history people and theater people. And I have a background in both. In fact, when I started college, I was sort of dividing my time fairly equally between theatrical work and historical archaeology. And our department was frequently called upon, it's called Historical Preservation Department, to help out with some local museums who had living history programs, because they wanted people who understood both how to portray a character, but also had a very deep understanding of the historical context. So I was called upon to help with some local house museums. This was down in Newport, Rhode Island, where I still help sometimes. And through that, it made me realize how much fun it was and how much more personal the history could be. So I began working in Lexington over the summers. I always had family in town, and so it was a natural progression for me. In order to do this job, at the time, you had to provide historical clothing. All of the guides at that point were dressed in 18th century garb. And over the next couple of years, I found that I loved sewing for myself, wanted to expand that, and I wanted more reasons to do that sort of interpretation and to wear the costumes that I had spent a lot of time creating. And several of my coworkers, of course, were also reenactors in the group. And so I asked around until I found a group that fit.
Excellent. Well, that's excellent start. So clearly all three of you have been doing this for decades. And I was wondering, what impact has this had on your regular life, if there is a regular life?
Well, Chris and I are still working full time, and so is Sarah. So, we tuck this in around our regular life, but it does. Before we were in reenacting, as an example, we often went, let's say, camping over Memorial Day weekend. But now we know that we're probably going to march in a couple of parades, so we don't go away. So we choose to, revolve our life and our activities around what we anticipate will be, reenacting activities. But yeah, we spend a lot of time reading books, researching, preparing our clothes and other things, planning events, practicing dancing, singing.
Yes, there are a lot of our non-working time is taking up in something related to reenacting, but yes, we still have time to visit family and friends and to do hiking and kayaking. So it has had an impact. If I wasn't reenacting, I'd probably be reading more books for pleasure. And I still try to read books for pleasure that aren't history books, and that happens, but not as much as I used to.
Yeah, I think I'm in the minority of people who have been able to make something of a living out of historical work. I don't think it's the norm by any means. I just happen to fall into it. I keep looking back at my resume and thinking that this shouldn't have happened, and everything sort of flows so well into it. And I've, been fortunate enough to just grow in the same organization over the last 15 years, which most people do not have the privilege to be able to do. So it, at this point, permeates a lot of my life, because many of my friends in this hobby are also my coworkers. They're my colleagues that I can call upon to help me in my work to make the various programs that the Historical Society runs more vibrant.
Excellent. Well, another question I have is what do you see the difference, or if there is a difference, between living history and reenacting? That's a kind of a tough question.
Sarah, why don't you take that one?
We're starting anyway.
Yeah.
I've been mulling this over the last week, and I don't know if I have a definitive answer to that. I think for me, when I think of living history, when I'm doing it, it's much more context-based. If I'm at a particular site with a very specific goal in mind, and much more what I would consider to be experimental archaeology, if I'm doing a a demonstration or actively working in such a way that people did in the past. So for instance, I might, spend a day cooking or spinning or really living in that time period, the living part of the living history. And I feel like a reenactment can mean many different things. They can be based on a specific event, or they can be more general. Here's what it might have been like to be on a battlefield, not any specific battlefield. And in fact, in many of those events, because I don't portray a soldier, there are limited ways for me to interact in that actual reenactment part of the event. And so I'm often doing the interpretation off to the side and explaining to people what's happening in real time. And, for me, that's not necessarily living history. That's me putting on my educator hat. But I think that pretty much everyone in this conversation would likely have a different definition of those two words.
I noticed what you say, that a reenactment often revolves around an event or a theoretical event. It's recreating an action, and there can be some blur between the two. And I think of living history as something a little more up close and personal. Yeah, and very often dealing with the rhythms of life, particular aspects of the daily routines of people from the past.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question is this, and I did a little research. So this term period rush, have you ever experienced that? This is the moment when suddenly maybe you are in another place, I guess. What does this period rush mean? What have you ever felt that? And can you elaborate on what it's all about?
Well, I can't say that I have ever, for even just a moment, thought that I was living in a different era, but it certainly is thrilling to be, for instance, if we're at an encampment, and you're cooking over the fire and you're hauling water and, sleeping in a canvas tent, etc. It gives you a small glimpse of what life might have been like had you been, let's say, a soldier of the Revolutionary War, but I always know that at the end of the day or the end of the weekend, I'm going to come home to a dwelling that has indoor plumbing and heating and so forth. So it's, I don't know. I don't feel as though I've ever actually lapsed into feeling like I was really there. How about you?
Well, I've had feelings of satisfaction that when I've been around other reenactors, especially, and we're all doing a dang good job of it. There's a feeling that seems to be more than the sum of its parts that comes across. And if I'm working, doing things with my hands, let's say on the cider press, or even within militia, handling the musket, and just knowing that I'm performing the actions that someone did perform 245 years ago, a certain feeling comes over. And I have to say that at the Battle of Lexington, at the start of the battle, I'm released from the British ranks as a released prisoner, and I jog out and I move off to the side. But in the confusion, my character is shot dead. And so I hit the ground and I lay still, and my heart's pounding, and I realize that that my pulse is pounding a little more and quicker, and just the short jog out of the British ranks can't account for all of it. There is a feeling of excitement in the air that Eric, you had alluded to earlier.
Yeah, I think, Eric, you did a great job of describing that during your introduction, when you were talking about what it was like being here for the Patriots' Day reenactment. And I think for me, as just a human being, but also as an educator, that multisensory experience is such a huge part of it. I've been, lucky enough over the course of my life to have many other educators in my life who taught through doing rather than just through reading or through looking. And I think that gives you a much better sense of the past to feel like you're a part of it. And for me, I think particularly having watched that reenactment from multiple venues, from inside the tavern across the street, as well as from on the green itself, real life does kind of fall away a little bit, and particularly with military music, which is very popular around here. Often, even if I'm not participating in a mock battle at an event, I will march behind the rest of the soldiers because there's just something about the reverberation of the drums as everyone is moving it as one that you really do kind of feel like you're going somewhere with a sense of purpose that's maybe beyond yourself. I feel like I've felt that more during those moments even than during the battles themselves, probably because I'm not physically participating in the altercation. But as a participant, I just hope that the crowd also feels that, because ultimately I think that's why we're here, is to give people a better appreciation of the humanity and the emotions behind these events that we're recreating.
Yes, I would say that on the morning of when we're reenacting April 19th, 1775 on Lexington Green, I start off as an interpreter for the masses. And it definitely has an electric feeling. I can feel it from the people. I mean, I know I'm excited too, but there really is something going on as you hear, as Eric described, the sun is beginning to rise and the birds are twittering, and then you hear those drums coming from afar. I think we all have a tingle that goes up our spine.
I'm also frequently inside the tavern as well. There's very few lights in there at 4 o'clock in the morning. And when half of the Minutemen are inside the tavern in the dark, and you think that is probably just as many, or maybe not even as many men who were crammed into that building at the time, their energy just of going into the reenactment is palpable. And when you try and think of how much higher that energy would have been, even, going into an actual battle, it's very haunting.
Well, you guys have been very eloquent in terms of describing those things, which are just absolutely fascinating and really encouraging to hear, because as a viewer, we get your enthusiasm and then the event itself and all of that comes together. It's just fantastic. I wanted to ask you about the particular communities or groups that you belong to. I know you've done different roles and worked with other people. And I wonder if you could comment on what that is like, what the different groups are like, and within that, explain these terms that you might refer to one another within your reenactment or living history communities, such as stitch counters or farbs or farbies or being farby. In any case.
May I launch into that one?
Yes, please.
Well, first of all, there's reenactors as a whole, within the greater Boston area, going out for a couple hundred miles from that, New England. There's a strong community feeling among lots of reenactors that we wind up seeing each other 2 or 3 times a year at larger events, or maybe once a year at smaller events. So in the general sense, there's that community as a whole. And then very often will belong to a particular organization. For instance, Lexington Minutemen or 10th Regiment of Foot, for 2 very local examples.
And the Charlestown Militia Company, the members of Charlestown.
Yeah. The first we were members of the Charlestown Militia Company, headed by Tom Coots, who really got us a good leg up on reenacting at an elevated level. then there are lots of town militias, the so-called town militias, usually that popped up preceding the bicentennial. And again, finding a way for each of those local towns to promote their own history and their own patriotic fervor. And so you'll some of the reenactments, you'll see some of the people from the town militias, and they might not venture forth from their town to do anything else all that much, but sometimes they do. So I wanted to get into my response to the term stitch counters and farbs. I now consider them disparaging terms. And a loose definition of a stitch counter would be someone who's, and to use them in the disparaging way that they are sometimes used, someone whose standards of authenticity are higher than yours, and they let you know it. And a farb would be someone whose standards of authenticity are less than yours, and you might let them know it by looking down however long a nose you choose to look down. But that leads me into my theory, my three-rung ladder theory of accuracy and knowledge, that every reenactor is on a middle rung. You can look to those that you think are more accurate than you and decide what about those standards of accuracy, the clothing or the accoutrements they're wearing or the way they present themselves are needed for what you want to do. And as soon as you obtain those things that you have desired, now you have left the rung you were on, and that rung you were on, you could say, was a little farby, but already you're on the middle rung again. You're always on the middle rung. Even the most accurate people, they will tell you they could still be more accurate. I don't know, was that a good start into it, or did I pontificate?
No, that's good. That's really good. Sarah, what are your thoughts about that?
I would agree with Chris 100%. I think as someone who's studied a lot of the material culture, but is very much aware of how much I'm always still learning, I never say never. I never say always. And I'm very much aware of the limitations when we think of our modern life and how much is available to us in terms of doing these recreations. There are times where it's physically not possible to do something that existed 200, 300 years ago that you wouldn't expect. There are very few 18th century knitting machines, for example. There are certain things like that, certain types of fabrics that aren't being created anymore. I've recently had the opportunity to be able to look at a lot of original 18th century pieces of clothing, and I'm constantly thinking about how you can't get this, not only just at Joann's, but even from some of the specialty, sort of reenactor stores online that we buy things from. And as an educator, what I can always do, I think personally, not speaking for anyone else, is to, do the best that I can within my budget, because this is a rather expensive hobby to have, and to be confident enough to say to someone, here is what I have done and here is what I still can do or should be doing but can't. If, for example, it is 100 degrees out and in theory I should be wearing wool, but I'm not because I don't want to get heat stroke, I'm fine talking about that. I know people that have to wear modern orthopedic shoes, for example, and I will generally say, those people should still be more than allowed to be a part of this as long as they're willing to explain what they're doing. I think the public can very much tell when someone has put extra effort into their clothing or when they haven't. But I also understand that a lot of people have different reasons for doing this. Some people are very social about their history. not so much about the material culture, and some people are very much the opposite. But I completely agree that I feel like I'm always sort of in the middle. And I just happen to be someone who takes pleasure in doing research and making little tiny stitches on my clothing. I do not count them. But it is a fun challenge to, practice your basic hand sewing.
It's funny what you were saying about Joanne's. They probably know you really well in there.
They
Here
do,
she comes
and
again.
I still have an outfit that I wear that I made back in 2013 out of Joanne's fabric, and it is very thin right now. But now I can portray a lower class person who has patched their clothing many times.
There you go. There you go. Well, that's great because you kind of touched a little bit, quite a few different topics there. But I want to go back a little bit to the community part, in the sense that what about the standards of clothing and equipment? Who sets those standards? Is it different in different groups? And what are your experiences with that? It kind of goes to that idea of farbs and stitch counters in a sense. At least there's a hierarchy or a level of commitment. Any thoughts on that? Are some groups more into it than others, or?
Yeah, I would say individual groups often have their own standards, but quite frequently there are also larger organizations that we all participate with that often have higher standards that everyone works towards. So for instance, the National Park Service, that most of the Revolutionary War reenactors in the area who participate at what we call Battle Road, which is the precursor on the weekend of Patriots Day. If you participate in that event as a member of any organization, then you are required to meet a certain standard. And so, for instance, my group, the 10th Regiment of Foot, is consistently working towards their standards of authenticity so that we can both be as historically accurate as possible, but also continue to participate in these events.
Yes, I'm grateful for the people of the National Park and the Friends of the Park and others who do this research to set the standards so that they know what the pattern of the clothing is, what colors are most common, things like that. And then they inform us of these standards right on their website, telling us what we should aspire to and what will no longer be acceptable.
And again, regarding standards, there are some reenactors who are independents, that they have perhaps chosen a particular character, whether it's someone well-known from history or not, and they do their own research and they decide what's going to work. There are people who belong to a reenacting outfit, and usually the leadership of that outfit will decide what is the standard for them. Some people volunteer at historical houses or museums, and very often the museum or house then will decide what the standard is. And then there are, perhaps larger events that have many participants, something like the Old South Meeting House or the Boston State House, who put on the Boston Massacre reenactment and a meeting of before the Boston Tea Party, and they also will have their standards, and they draw on reenactors from many different parts of New England and sometimes beyond. So many people, there are many, so the short answer is there are many different standards. And we mentioned the National Park. If you go onto the Minuteman National Park website, there might be something under the volunteer section and reenactor or volunteer resources, and you can snake your way through the navigation to find the clothing standards there. And they get pretty particular as to material and type of clothing on those.
So have you guys ever been told that you're not living up to those standards? I mean, in the early years, or forbidden to participate, or how's that conveyed to you?
Yes, it's happened. And, sometimes, it leads one to improves one impression that one presents. And again, sometimes it makes you decide, okay, what's more important to me right now? Is it more important to be part of that event and to put all the effort needed for me right now? Or there are other parts of my life that are more important at the present time? So sometimes the goal to be part of something is put off to another day. And there is something else that was in the back of my head I wanted to mention, but it will come back to me later, I'm sure.
In particular with the Park Service, we do meet up in March of every year and go over what we're planning to do. It's usually a day-long seminar where the local historians present their most recent research. If there's anything in particular that Minuteman would like to focus on for that particular year, the logistics of how the day-long reenactment will go. And then generally you are requested to wear and bring whatever you will have with you on that day, so that if there is anything that has not, met the current standards, they will let you know a month ahead of time. And yeah, there have been times where I've thought, oh, I'm being very creative here. And, something is plausible, but has not been properly documented, which is something that everyone has to grapple with in terms of at what point can you say, I think that if I were living back then, I would do this thing, but I haven't found that piece of paper that says that someone actually did it. And it's a constant battle to have that diversity of expression and experience that existed back then, while dealing with what's actually a quite limited amount of primary source documents. We work with illustrations and newspapers and diaries and things of that sort. But for the average person, a lot of their material culture and their relationship with it just doesn't survive unless you have a certain, category of wealth.
And I'm remembering now what I was thinking of before when I was saying it. Let's say you're a historical house or local museum and you're having an event. Perhaps your town had some, in history, a town meeting had some fiery resolve, resolve with some fiery rhetoric or something like that. And you want to play that up. I would say, don't trip over yourselves too much by saying, oh, we can't do it unless we have a reenactor who has crossed every T and dotted every I in the accuracy of their clothing. Sometimes it just takes a board member to put on a tricorn hat and a cape or something and read out that proclamation, for independence, or this tax, the way it was implemented was thoroughly unacceptable. And if your goal is to present that part of history to the people who show up on your event, you're accomplishing your goal. I would also say, look around, and you probably have some reenactors in your town. And you may have some reenactors who have been at your place and you're really glad to have them. Love your volunteers. Be loyal to them. If someone tells you, I'm glad your volunteers are loyal and they help out things, but their clothing's not really right, be loyal to your volunteers. If someone wants to come in and horn in and push them out, again, be loyal to your volunteers. Listen to the person whose standards of accuracy are higher and find out how dedicated they're going to be going forward. And if they're going to be very dedicated, they can make clothes for your volunteers. See if they're that interested in your organization that they'll go that extra mile to not only make appropriate clothes for themselves to appear at your place, but also to make appropriate clothing to the volunteers who are already working there. Anyway, that's a high horse I sit on sometimes. And I'm proud to be on it, but I'm going to step off it right now.
Well, that's great. So that raised a couple other questions in my mind, and I'll just go through two more questions, and then we'll open it up to other people. And I do want to give you a chance to look at some of the images that you have, Chris and Claire. One of them was one of my questions was, how do you get to decide what character you play? I mean, can you just be that, or is it something that's a group decision, or do you have to do the background stuff and say, this is who I'm going to be, and here's my stack of information showing that this is for real? Or how does that get decided?
Well, very often the role is assigned. For instance, if you're doing a cemetery tour, you're told what stone you should stand by, and so that's who you are. For instance, with the Lexington Historical Society, they put on a wonderful Halloween cemetery tour, and I've been asked to portray Ruth Buckman. And so I have learned, about her life and et cetera. Sometimes we're given a script, which is very helpful, but other times we're asked to do our own research.
Yeah, and so I also have done cemetery tours with Claire, portraying various people. And again, it's the Historical Society. Some historians of town have said, oh, these were some interesting people, and we know where they're buried, and they'd be good as part of a cemetery tour. So done in Woburn and Stoneham and Lexington. And when I joined the Charlestown Militia, I didn't know anyone's actual names from that era, so I was just an anonymous person. But when you join the Lexington Minutemen, then you will be assigned a character, and you find that they have researched over the years. Many historians have tried to figure out who was there on Lexington Common, and so we have a list of about 70 men. And my first year, since I live in Woburn, I decided to portray a man from Woburn, and there I was, over 50 years old, and I was playing a 16-year-old kid because he was carrying a musket on Lexington Common. But I found out about his family, and I researched him. But lately, I've been portraying that other Woburn man as a held portrait. So it really depends on where you are, whether or not you're anonymous or someone in particular, and who makes the decision about who you are. Sarah, do you remember, did you start off portraying anyone in particular when you started with Lexington?
Only in the cemetery. I've been by the same grave for a decade now. So I was a volunteer at that event, and thank you very much to Chris and Claire for being volunteers at that event. I was also a volunteer for many years before I started running that particular event. But yeah, it very much depends on if you are in a specific reenactment group. They have different rules. As Chris said, I think that's their motto, the Minutemen. We know their names, we remember their names, something like that. Mm-hmm. For my group, the 10th Regiment, we do not portray particular people within the regiment. Although people do choose occasionally specific roles that they want to portray, particularly for those of us who are not soldiers, or who maybe want to have an extra layer to what they talk about. So we have someone who has decided to portray a surgeon, for example. He didn't have to do that, but he's interested in that history. And so he's done extra research. If people ask me what I'm doing there, why I'm in a British soldiers camp, I can explain the different reasons why a woman such as myself might be in that situation, whether I'm married to a soldier or I am someone who's loyal to the crown, who's been displaced from, and populate a town that didn't agree with their politics. There's a lot of different things that could lead me to be in that situation. It's easier in that particular circumstance because we do not do first person acting. I think that had come up in a question as well. I do occasionally do acting, first person saying, I am this character. but quite often I'm just portraying myself in an 18th century outfit, explaining the history as Sarah in the 21st century. I've always been fascinated by the people who honed in on their one particular historical figure that they've been able to research their entire lives. I've known many of them. There are at least two of them on this call today. I've always admired those people. But for the most part, if I'm volunteering with another organization, they'll say, can you portray this particular type of person? Or we have someone in our history that we'd like you to portray. Here's a reading list before the event.
Excellent. So one last question before we open it up to our audience, but I was wondering, we sort of touched a little bit on the costs of this, and if you wouldn't mind sharing, what kind of investment do you have to have for the equipment, the costumes, the travel, the accoutrements? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, let's see.
Or do you want to?
Well, it can be sizable, yeah.
Well, for instance, we mentioned the authenticity standards, and over time, I have, to meet those, I've had to hire, I don't sew myself, so I've had to hire people to make better clothing for me. And, it is hundreds of dollars for the materials and for the time to hand sew an entire woman's gown. My husband has learned to sew, and he's made a few things that's very helpful. And, we've traveled, to other states. We've traveled overseas to France. We've gone up to Canada. So, there are some travel costs with this, but we love the hobby. We love having these experiences in all these different places. So, it's worth it for us.
Yeah, for travel costs, we try to, if we're going to a reenactment, we try to expand the time and work in a vacation as well.
That's right. We bring with us our canvas reenacting tent, and then the other part of the trunk has our, regular synthetic tent, so that afterwards we can go camping nearby.
Over the years, we started off with just a few bits of clothing and a musket, which can, a reproduction musket, can start at $600 or $700. And if you want a nice custom-made fowler, you could spend $3,000 or more. But a lot of things, over time, incrementally, sometimes there's the one big purchase that year, whether it's the tent or a couple of purchases. Oh, this is the year we get that special bounty coat, the type of coat that was given out to Massachusetts militia late in '75. And that we don't actually need, but it looks good every now and then. We started off with just a couple of things in the closet. Then we went on Craigslist and found like an armoire, like a physical piece of wardrobe that we put in our basement. And we said, that will hold our reenacting stuff. Well, a year and a half later, it was full. So there are costs involved. If you were a person who if it's possible to itemize charitable deductions, by the way, and if you are one who can itemize, if you have an accountant, you might want to discuss with your accountant the possibility of a tax write-off, that clothing you wear for reenacting is not considered usable in the workaday world of the 21st century. And your accountant might agree that it could be considered a charitable expense for an organization that you work for, much as an aide at a hospital who volunteers their time but has to wear a special, let's say, a candy striper uniform that they're not going to wear day to day, and that would be tax deductible. So that's something to consider. So yes, I would say that expenses for us per year are easily about $2,000. Yeah. I actually came back with a money figure, Eric. I got around to it.
I figured long enough we'd hear it. Sarah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say as a civilian, I do not have quite the same amount of pressure on me to have all the different accoutrements that a soldier would. So that's very useful. I'm also, the type of person who just enjoys sewing, so that helps a lot. And it's really that age-old question of, do you want something done fast, cheap, or well? You can never have all three. And I generally forego the fast part of it by doing something myself. Of course, fabric is still quite expensive and the prices go up and down. But if you're willing to put, that effort in to chucking something in a corner for a few months because you've become frustrated with it and then eventually finish it, I've definitely done that. And of course, just because I've dealt with a variety of organizations, similarly to Claire in particular, you've really expanded the type of people that you portray. That can be kind of my personal downfall in terms of saying, oh, I really love to do this type of thing, especially if an organization that I volunteer for is doing a new type of event where I might, per se, want to portray someone who is of a higher social standing than what my normal outfit might be. Do I make a whole new dress and think, yeah, like in the future, will I use this again? If not, I need to stop myself. Can I just make some new accessories or spruce myself up, make my hair a little bit bigger, that kind of thing. But so many of us, we joined this probably because we liked wearing costumes and hanging out and looking different and just having that sense of the novel experience. And so that's most of it. For the 10th Regiment, we get a decent amount of money from parades and sort of public appearances. Most reenactments that are open to the public are not something that we get paid for. And so we contribute, say, $20 per weekend that goes to purchasing our food, which I think is perfectly acceptable when we're cooking, multiple hot meals a day, and it tastes a lot better over a campfire. So yeah, the expenses add up, but in particular, I try not to purchase anything that I'm not going to use frequently. And even things like I have 18th century vintage, silverware from the 18th century. I eat with it. Nothing's going to happen to it. It's made out of metal. And then there are millions of them out there in the world. Reproduction cups and, even my spinning wheel. If I want to make some yarn, I can make some yarn.
So most of the time we are volunteers, but it is nice when we are offered some payment for helping to create a scene. And, I don't know if Sarah wants to weigh in. And what is the value of having properly attired, knowledgeable reenactors at your event, and how that helps the public to, really feel immersed in the time. And often we have participatory activities, and the public loves that. So maybe you want to weigh in as someone from Lexington Historical Society on that.
Yeah, I would love to work more. Again, as someone who comes from theater as well, I've noticed that more places that I've worked with have started to try and offer occasional stipends and things like that. Yeah. Something that I, personally would love to work towards. At the very least, I like to say, I'm going to feed you. If I can't do anything else, I will give you food. If you're going to be here for more than, an hour or so, because I do think it is important. And similarly to a lot of different parts of the education sector, I think often people are undervalued for the expertise that they bring. When people are coming in with their own personal, love of history that they've researched, and often they're given sometimes a quite extensive packet of information that they must learn about the event or the character they're portraying. It's an incredible amount of work that goes into it. It's a labor of love. I've cooked food, historical food for events, at no expense. I know a lot of people who do that. We purchase our own sort of accessories and objects that we like to do demonstrations on, for example, like my spinning wheel, things of that sort. But ultimately, I do think that having reenactors at an event, if you do have that particular type of event that you want people to learn more about. There are different levels of that. Like Chris was mentioning, more community-based events. So, for example, we have our annual Lexington Tea Party reenactment that the Hurleys are involved with. And sometimes we have people who are not really reenactors who come in and we have an MC who rallies up the crowd and says, "You hate King George, I can't hear you." You know, none of that happened in real life. But I think having that sense that you can look at someone and see them in that historical attire, and for that split second feel like you're back in time a little bit, it helps to contextualize it. Because so often we think of these people in the past as being so foreign to us. You know, the past is a foreign country, a foreign planet. And, you know, my ultimate goal in doing anything is to remind people that people have always been people. They might dress funny, they might have a different, language than you, but they're just people being put through bizarre circumstances in the same way that we are now. And if I'm trying to explain to someone what happened during an event that might seem foreign to them, it is so important for me to get that multisensory experience to the public so that they can more fully understand what's happening, rather than just saying, for instance, 50 people got together with spinning wheels and they made yarn for a day. We've had events where we've gotten 50 women to stand in the spot, not necessarily dressed up, but even just having 50 people standing in that spot gives you a sense of the enormity of that event. And if you can get half that number of people who are actually dressed up and have spinning wheels, then that makes it even more real. And it reminds you that this is something that any of us could have lived through.
Eric, may I share a couple of pictures with you?
Please.
Okay, well, let's see. So if I share this then. Okay, so here, this is the Lexington Minutemen, and you're probably looking at about $20,000 worth of clothing right here, and muskets and other things. Special musical instruments, reproduction musical instruments, they're a big chunk of change as well. But apart from the clothing, and it's not all hand sewn, that there's a lot of time when you're in a musket company that you have to devote to drill, especially if you're going to be firing. You have to have safety standards, and doing the manual exercise so you can handle the musket correctly is very, very important. This is in the Hancock Clark house, and that's the silhouette of Jonas Clark, and I'm doing a very poor job of trying to fill his silhouette. But
you have the hair.
Yeah, so I got the hair now, yeah. And part of the wonderful world of reenacting is the travel. This is, I think, at Old Fort Niagara.
Yeah, it is,
and that was just part of the encampment. And
now these encampments can bring hundreds of reenactors together.
Yeah. And well, this I'm missing the forward button. So, yeah. So if I can find it over here, yeah, we'll go backwards then. Okay, this is the cider press. So this is another investment. So I was able to make most of it myself, but I had to outsource the wooden screws. That's something I don't know how to do. And a reenactor blacksmith helped with the bolts that put it together. And I say help, but I paid him. One thing in reenacting, there are specialty professions, and you try to support each other. And you don't try to get too many things at a discount. You try to pay people for their time and their knowledge. And this is all the equipment I need for cidering with my wife. The press portable broken down all in a cart at Minuteman Park. And this is some of Claire's wonderful clothing.
cooking at the hearth
Yeah.
in a home that was built in the 1700s.
Yeah, and so these are some reenacting friends who moved to New Hampshire, and they specifically wanted to buy an old house that had working fireplaces. And this is just a nice shot of a reenactment. This was from many years ago. I think it was at Old Fort Niagara, or Niagara on the Lake, across the border of Canada. Yeah. And it shows, just some downtime. You can see some cars in the background. So it takes away a little bit from the experience. And having these dining flies, that's not all that accurate either, but it really helped with the camaraderie. And here's Claire with the Lexington Colonial Singers, always with the token Brit, of course, with Paul O'Shaughnessy there, and led by Diane Taraz.
There with the dulcimer or the...
Yeah. And this is the Claire with her friends Darlene and Sheila performing Civil War as Linen and Lace.
I belong to several singing groups, and we both belong to dancing groups, like colonial dancing groups.
Yeah. And I'll find the not share button, I guess, if I move everyone's picture off to a different spot there.
Yeah. Okay.
Those are great. Fantastic. Oh, wow. What a great, I'm really thrilled that we've gone into this in excellent depth. I'm wondering if people in our audience have any comments or would like to engage with our panel. Anybody? They could maybe raise their reaction hand. Nobody want to interact with that? Oh, okay. Sue?
Go ahead.
Yes, I am not a reenactor, but I wanted to make a couple of comments as a producer of a reenactment. Yeah. I do produce the Paul Revere's Ride reenactment each year, and Chris portrays Reverend Jonas Clark. Sarah portrays his wife. Sorry, Claire.
Well, I'm just an interpreter.
I have very limited role. I make sure that Chris doesn't get decapitated by our 18th century window. That's about it.
That's and you manage all those children. Don't forget that. But anyway, managing a dozen or so reenactors and a couple of horses isn't the easiest thing, but I am struck by their dedication. They take on their roles very seriously most of the time, and they research who their people are to the extent where occasionally they'll make a comment about the script and want to tweak it a little bit to conform to what they feel their character would have said or how they would have reacted to something. And it just strikes me that, by the time the night of the performance comes, they're into it, and the audience standing in the street is really into it, cheering people on, cheering the horses, booing at the appropriate places. And it all comes together and works really well. And I just want to say that I'm impressed by their dedication and how they handle these things. And thank you.
And thank you, Sue. That is a great event, and you do a great job putting it all together.
Thank you. Couldn't do it without you.
Anybody else want to weigh in? Matt and Dallas?
Yeah, we were talking about transcending that plane of actually being there. Mm-hmm. One of the things I learned, I was at a reenactment in Antietam, and we were watching the people come on the field, and it seemed just like the Union would just keep coming and coming and coming. And that's when it kind of struck me. We all read the casualty reports and the numbers, but it's not until you can put a number with a face. That's what it looks like. We didn't even have the casualties for Antietam during that reenactment, let alone the mass of people that were there originally. It's just that, to me, that's what that's what gives you a focus of what it was like and how you present that to a crowd.
I bring that up with school groups a lot because the locals have often been to reenactments. And even, kids from out of state, for example, who may have been to a Civil War reenactment like that, to try and explain without them being there what it must have been like. Say, has anyone been to Patriots Day? Has anyone been to a reenactment? Do you remember how noisy it was? Do you remember how smoky it was? And then to let them know that that was maybe only 1/10 or less of the actual people who were there, and how much more terrifying and chaotic and crowded and loud, and the smells and the sounds from having hundreds or thousands of people there firing live rounds, which is a whole other experience from, when we're portraying a battle, nothing is real, it's all powder. How much more the experience is, you get that heart in your throat just from being there in this tiny sliver of a mock battle. So to be able to explain to someone how much more it would have been in real life is a lot.
We have found in our experience, many of the reenactors have never live fired their muskets.
That's true.
So what we do is we sponsor a primitive snowshoe biathlon at a local rod and gun club in the woods for steel targets and such. And we bring people over and give them an opportunity to compete and to also actually use the musket. And people come back and, I never realized this, or I never thought about that, And that adds to your impression also, I think.
Yeah, so I've heard about the primitive biathlon. Yeah, snowshoes and muskets, yeah. And I've only live fired one of my muskets once. When I first bought my first musket, a friend brought me to a firing range to give me the experience of actually having a musket ball come out of the musket. And I haven't done it since. But yes, you're right. There are many, many reenactors who have never done that.
Yeah. Chris and Claire, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk in a larger sense about maybe having people join you, or any kind of advocacy you might want to do, and also Sarah, of course, for what you do, because I think you're speaking to a crowd that might be swayed.
Well, the reenacting community is a wide and vibrant group of people from all different backgrounds with different knowledge and agendas on why they want to be part of reenacting. And, with the 250th anniversary of the battle on Lexington Green and so forth, and the events of the American Revolution coming up, groups such as ours are recruiting, and we're looking for people to join us. It is, first, just a great deal of fun. It really is. The people whom we've met as fellow reenactors and the public, it's just been a wonderful, wonderful experience, obviously, that we've been doing it for all these years. And, to share information among ourselves and to share experiences of doing battles, etc. And even after the battle, if we're doing an encampment after the public goes home and the smoke has, arisen in the air and everything is quiet again, we get together and have dinner and we sing and play musical instruments. We have a wonderful time together. And so it's just, I did not realize the variety of areas that you could specialize in. I mean, if you, as a reenactor, want to learn how to do candle making or cooking over a fire, sewing, all different skills. My husband and I do colonial dancing. We do this quite frequently, actually. Yeah. And I'm part of colonial singing groups. So, if you play an instrument or want to develop some kind of a skill, there may be a place for it in 18th century reenacting.
Yes, regarding the dancing, I never did any sort of dancing until Darlene Wigton, who was a fellow member of Charlestown Militia Companies, said, you know, you guys should learn how to dance.
Very much part of colonial life.
Yeah,
so.
And she told us that if you can march, and we've seen you march, you can do colonial dancing. And so she taught us the figures. And if you've ever, seen the dance scene in just about every Jane Austen movie, it looks a lot like that, except the clothing's a little different, period. So yes, it's a lot of fun. There are many different types of activities. There are many organizations, just off the top of my head, there are local militias who also do living history as well, such as there's Stowe, there's Acton. There are, I think, folks down in Taunton and south of Boston. And of course, we had already mentioned Lexington and Charlestown. And again, that was just off the top of my head. And many of them are members of umbrella organizations such as the Continental Line or the British Brigade. And you can probably find those umbrella organizations and look at their membership and find one that's near you. And if you want to join it, you can join it, or you can reach out to them and invite them to your premises.
Yeah, the social aspect is absolutely wonderful. Yeah. I've found just the most amazing group of friends, people who, start out as just work colleagues, and now you meet up at least once a month for practicing and doing multiple events per year. But it's an amazing friend group. And so I think in particular with Massachusetts, for Revolutionary War, outside of that, you get more to Civil War and other types of reenactment groups, but there's such a variety around here that you really do have that choice. I was, kind of shopping around, 10 years ago when I was thinking about this. I knew a number of people in different groups and managed to find one that had both people that I knew and admired and got along with, but also people within my age range. I found a group that was, gender inclusive. We have many women who portray soldiers, things like that. There are a lot of options out there, depending on the type of experience that you want. Do you want to go camping in the woods without any modern amenities? Do you want to be the person who, stands in front of the building? And talks about the architecture. There's just so much out there, and once you find your people, it really just kind of clicks, and it's wonderful. So for my one plug for my own group, of course, you need to have a bad guy in order to have a reenactment, and a lot of people like to join the British because we get invited to a lot of events because you need to have British there, and we also have very cool uniforms. And because the 10th Regiment has been around since the bicentennial, they were able to snag the very coveted URL of redcoat.org. So it's very easy.
All right. Well, I think we're drawing to an end of this conversation, and I really want to thank our participants. Certainly incredibly enthusiastic and dedicated and committed, and I've learned so much. I'm inspired by what you guys do. And I think all of us here that are watching really feel thankful that you do what you do. I mean, you bring history to life that just can't be done in another way. And so thank you for your expenses that you go through when we didn't talk about the itchiness or whatever else. But all those things, because on the day when we really need you there, you're there, and it's just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So a hearty thanks to you for participating, and to all our audience for tuning in, as I think this has really been a great insight into something that's just absolutely a fascinating topic. And now I'll pass it on to Plume to massage us on out, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric and Plume and Sarah and everyone listening. It was a wonderful opportunity to share our experiences on 18th century reenacting with you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Of course.
Chris and Claire for inviting me.
Thank you, Eric. Just to conclude with the thank yous. Been very interesting conversation. I'm hoping that you will join us for an upcoming conversation in February, working with high schoolers. March 10th, No Battles Fought Here, a conversation about planning revolutionary commemoration, even if you don't have a battle to reenact in your town. I think that one is going to be of interest to most towns in Massachusetts. On March 24th, we're going to be talking about researching the history of enslavement in Massachusetts with Jane Siaka, who is here today. I think that's it for upcoming conversations. Please leave us a survey. Thank you to our sponsors. We couldn't do it without you. We'll see you next time. Talk to you soon.